Thanks.
Hi, Peggy. So good to have you here. Thank you for joining us on Michelle's Conversations That Matter.
Michelle, thanks so much. Excited to be here. The sun's shining and loving life.
Yes, I'm so excited to have met you through a mutual friend. I love when people think about connecting people together that they just know there's an art to being a connector. I think knowing the right person to connect, and I'm so grateful to have met you. So we're going to talk today about navigating grief. We're going to talk about your personal story. I think that your story is incredible, and I know that there are people out there grieving who could benefit from hearing your story and hearing what you learned through that process. So I'm so excited to bring my audience you and your story. But before we dive into this topic, just a little bit about Michelle's Conversations That Matter. I created this series to elevate the conversation around mental health and to shine a light on this important topic, to have people be inspired or educated about important mental health related topics, from clinicians to people with lived experience like yourself. And I'm thrilled to have yet another conversation about grief. I feel that we don't talk about this topic enough. Professionally, I work with organizations to help recenter their employees and really have them be engaged in their life and feel balanced, and also have a healthy relationship to brain health. And to teach compassion. I think that compassion is something that we really need to be talking more about and extending to one another. So with that, Peggy, I'd love for you, please just introduce yourself to the audience, who you are, where you live, and what you do for a living.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. And you know what? I am so grateful for the connection as well. And I also like the work that you're doing. You know, there are so many areas of people needing help and through their grief on different fronts, and the work environment, the personal environment. So I really think that your work is so valuable as well. So thank you for what you do.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So yes, I'm Peggy Green, and I am an author and a public speaker and a grief coach. And I live in colorful Colorado. It's a beautiful state here. I'm a Colorado native. And so I have been working as a grief coach for some time now, and in coaching, in the coaching realm in some form or another for a really long time, in between fitness coaching, nutrition coaching, wellness coaching. And so I've taken and pivoted those coaching type experiences into helping others through their grief.
Amazing. We're going to get into that in a moment. But before we do, tell us about the book that you wrote.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for asking. So, you know, there's always a story behind writing this book. And let me grab it. It is called Life After Child Loss, the Mother Survival Guide to Cope and Find Joy. So this is the front here, and it's a sunrise. And that sunrise has a lot of significance to it. That in sharing my story and how this book came about is that 2.5 years ago, my son died by suicide. And when I received that news, I had this horrible flashback of 28 years prior when I lost a 9-month-old daughter. And I really had to process this loss. And so I wound up talking and sharing on Facebook what I was experiencing. I was being vulnerable. I was sharing how badly I was hurting, but then also I was sharing what I was doing to heal. And I had so many people who said, wow, this is absolutely amazing. This is helping me in my grief. I was more focused on myself until people started encouraging me and saying, hey, this is helping. This is working for me. Keep doing it. And then the seed was planted by others to write a book. I've never, ever written a book before. I've never thought of myself as a writer. But I decided that, yes, this was going to be a way for me to really take everything that I'd used up to that point and share it and inspire other women and help them. So this book has the tools and techniques that I used originally, you know, when I put those on paper, that those are what I used. And then I also have processed up to now, some things that I'm using as well. So it's been a little bit of a revelation on two sides. You know, the book came from those initial things that were really, really helpful. So yeah.
Amazing. I can't even wrap my mind around the magnitude of loss that you've endured as a mom. And my heart goes out to you for that. But I also admire you so much for really leaning in and saying, I can help other people who might be experiencing the same amount of grief and just don't know how to help themselves. So tell us a little bit about, like, how did you process it? Where did you even begin? And then maybe we can talk a little bit about the questions that you asked yourself and that you sometimes use when you're coaching your grief clients.
Yeah. Well, and Michelle, what's really interesting, and you talked about the magnitude of my loss, and I just want to put things in a little bit more perspective for everyone. So 30 years ago, my first child passed away. 22 years ago, my father. 12 years ago, my sister. 13 years ago, a cousin, niece, and then my mother passed away recently. So in those 30 years, a lot of really close family members plus other friends. And so when I take all of that into perspective, I'm like, how has my grief been so different? And how have I been able to navigate each one? So with my first loss, Courtney was 9 months old, and it was a terrible accident in daycare. And processing hers is so different than the way as I compare my healing with my son's is so different. Hers was, it was that I had her for 9 months. I was grateful for all those times. And I had my sister and my mom and a few close friends to help me through this whole process. But there wasn't a whole lot of other resources available at that time. And so I really had to figure it out on my own. And I'm like, okay, I'm seeing these things. What's happening? How can I get myself through this? And so I did that and said, okay, I can do this. And then I experienced all these other losses. And I'm like, okay, how have I made it through those? So my son died by suicide. And death by accident and death by suicide, to me, felt so very different. And I'll be honest with you here, Michelle, is that I struggled with why I was feeling so different. I mean, it's like they're both children. And there were so many different things, is that I had a longer history with my son. He was 24. And, that we had those times that he was able to communicate with me, and we really had a deeper relationship. And then also that part about somebody making the choice to end their own life.
Yeah.
Ultimately, he ended his life, but was it in a healthy mental state? Most likely not. That it's a choice that they make. And I think that's one of the tougher things in processing the death of somebody by suicide, because they make that choice. And then we ask those questions like, why did they do it? Why didn't they come for help? Why didn't I see that? Or all these things of why. And so processing the difference, I've been in that canyon of why, but I made sure I didn't stay there.
Yeah.
But grieving is more of like, with Connor, it was more of that relationship that I felt that we really lost. We were close. And also that future. I mean, Courtney also had a future as well, but I hadn't started dreaming about, a college graduation or anything. It was like, oh, when's she going to start walking? And Connor had achieved those milestones. And now I was looking forward to the others of the college and the marriage and grandkids. So it was a different sort of dream that were now taken away. And so being able to process those has been really quite different. Suicide was a big factor in it as well.
Wow. I think about there's some back noise there. I don't know why. Okay. Sorry about that. I think about the magnitude of loss that so many of us have just gone through with coronavirus and losing so many loved ones. You know, a lot of people lost parents, lost family members, lost colleagues and loved ones. We lost a lot of people during this. And I think that it's so important to be talking about this and talking about how to navigate it and not allow it to manifest into other challenges. So talk to us a little bit about, you have, first of all, I really do applaud you for wanting to take your experience and pay it forward. I think that that's so admirable, instead of just, you know, of course you're focusing on your own recovery, but you're also very committed to sharing your tools with people. When we met earlier, you shared that you have a series of questions that you like to ask yourself. Tell us a little bit about that and how you help your clients just get present to a few things through those questions.
Yeah, you know, it's when we lose somebody, when they pass away, we feel like part of ourselves is gone, that we've lost that. And sometimes stepping into becoming the new you can be difficult. So one of my questions I really ask people to think about is, what part of your former self do you miss? And what would it mean to you to get that back? It may not be exactly the same, but people miss the joy, the happiness, and the peace. You can get those things back. And when those come back, then you realize it's like, okay, life is okay. I can move forward without feeling guilty. I can move forward, still remember my loved one. And, you know, some of the other things is like, well, I was an artist, or I enjoyed horseback riding, or I volunteered. So when people can dream of who they were and that they can be that person again and having those same things, I think really puts them in a position of evaluating, okay, am I ready and I'm willing to be able to put the work in to be able to heal and feel better and get that part of me back? It's one of my favorite questions.
I love that. I love that because you can then start to see what's possible by just remembering that. When does grief, in your experience, Peggy, when does grief turn into depression?
You know what, and I love that question, Michelle, because depression is not part of grief, because depression is a separate entity of its own. When we grieve, when we have somebody who passes or we lose that relationship, it's natural to mourn it. It's natural to miss somebody, but it's also natural to be able to get up and move forward with your day. Now, depression is more of like you're in fear. You can't function. You can't take care of yourself. You can't think, and you are just paralyzed and just want to become isolated. And that is not a normal part of grief. And when people start to see that that's happening to them, I think it's really important at that point that there is some intervention that needs to be done. And that's on the extreme side. But with grief, our society and the way we grieve has changed so much. And that's why working with grief coaches is just really exploding. Because we don't have that usual support that we had. Mm-hmm. We didn't have anybody to stay with us. You know, now it's like, okay, you had 3 days off of work, get back to work, or your family came and 10 days later you're left alone.
Yeah.
And so our grieving process is so different. And that's why the tools and techniques that we have offer help us with where we are today in our culture. And when you find yourself not grieving anymore, but slipping into those signs and symptoms of depression, then there's other intervention that needs to be done. I think either way, helping in grieving and helping with depression. So just be very cautious and mindful of it. And if you have questions about it, talk to somebody who can evaluate you and say, okay, I think you're okay. We can do an intervention here and we can help you with your grief, or it may need something with psychologist.
Yeah, I think that's nice. People, you know, when I think about the pandemic and I reflect on how many people were unable to properly grieve the loss of a loved one when we were quarantined and unable to actually celebrate their life through a service or, you know, some type of ritual that was, you know, important to us as the survivors. I think about how many people might be incomplete around the loss of a loved one. Do you have any words of advice that you can offer someone who just might be still struggling with grief after not being able to, or even if they have and they're still struggling?
Yeah, you know what that, Michelle, the thing is that you can still grieve and you can restart if you need to. And, you know, when we have memorial services, celebration of lives, those are really for those who are left surviving. And so if you feel that that is a ritual that you need to do, by all means, do it. And maybe it's something that others may or may not need to be with you, but make it something formal to help you process that. Mm-hmm. And then really taking the time to recognize that you have some grief and using some of the simple things like journaling. And that's one of the things I'd love to use is like, okay, how do I journal? And am I feeling like I'm angry? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? It's important to realize that you will never, ever get over your loss. I don't expect anybody to get over it, but I do think that it's very feasible for somebody to heal. Just think about, you know, if you fall down and you skin your knee really bad, okay, it's going to take some time to heal and it'll scab over. And then when you're done, you may have a scar. Yeah. And that's the same way with healing. It's like that will always be there, but the pain gets less and less and less if we choose to. I think I'm a big advocate of being able to make a choice in what we do with our life, how we perceive it, and how we move forward.
I like that. And I think that's a really great analogy to get people to realize that it's a process. It's not going to be something that is one size fits all. We're all going to have to navigate it in our own way. I think that's so important. What words of advice would you have for someone who has a loved one who's struggling and they can tell that they're struggling? Maybe they want to help, but they don't know how to help. Do you have any advice for like a loved one who sees that maybe their partner or a relative is still like really suffering from a loss?
You know, this is where when somebody's really suffering from a loss is that they do not have those additional resources and know how to process and get through it. And so it's that fine line in making the suggestion is like, okay, let's reach out to somebody and see how you can get some help is, you know, coming from that point of compassion and caring and love and saying, this is what I'm seeing that you're experiencing. I see that you're struggling with this. These are some things that maybe I can help you with is, you know, offering outside help, being there for them and just being. And sometimes it's just being and sitting with them or taking a meal to them even and asking questions. I know for myself, it's really important that I continue to talk about my children and asking, are you ready to talk about your loved one? Or offering memories that you experienced with the loved one if you were with them and knew them, or ask them to share about their loved one. And you can say, wow, he sounds like a really good guy. I would have liked to have known. Wow, I can see why you loved him so much. So I think that's one of the resources in which we can use to be able to help others,
Mm-hmm.
and letting them know that you love them.
That's amazing. I love that. And sometimes we underestimate the power of just our presence, right? Our presence and just being there and sitting with them in the darkness. I remember when my own mother passed away, I had a very dear friend. She just came and sat on the couch next to me. Didn't say a word, didn't need to, just was just in my presence. And that was so helpful in a very interesting way. How do you, Peggy, celebrate and remember the beautiful lives of your children?
Oh, this one's fun. So Courtney, it's so easy to remember her birthday because I was fortunate enough that I went on and had 3 other children, and one of which includes Connor. But her birthday is just 2 weeks away from her younger sisters. Yeah, there we go, younger sisters. And so it's easy to remember that and, to talk about it, because her birth experience was one of those, it wasn't just, go to the hospital and have a baby. It was more of a ordeal. There was some drama with it. And, so that in of itself is quite interesting to remember that. And just really remembering who she was in day to day. I have a picture of her up here on my desk that I look at and remember her fuzzball of hair, her blue eyes, and just her big old smile and her dimples, and thinking about those things and celebrating her. And, recently in last month was her 30-year angelversary. So recognizing that, and it's like, wow, I can't believe it's been that period of time, but she's still in my heart. And talking about her is just really huge. And then my son, Connor, and remembering him, again, there was a longer period of time, and celebrating him and talking about him is, obviously I've written the book. I've stepped into grief coaching because I really feel that that's something that he has shared with me, and then also that God has inspired me to do. In wearing tie-dye, he loved wearing tie-dyes. We created a memorial for him at a skate park, we planted a tree, and there's a dedicated memorial rock. So I go and visit that tree, but guess what? So many times I wind up watching the kids who skate. Mm-hmm. And sharing, and really now having more of a purpose. And what I do is in his honor. And I keep in touch with his friends.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that so much. It's like you are now the person who can hold the hand of someone who has been where you once were in honor of him. And I think that's so beautiful. Any other words of wisdom or thoughts that you would like to share?
Hold on for hope and believe. Really believe that you can enjoy your life again, and remember your loved one. Death is part of the circle of life, and we may get temporarily thrown for a loop, but don't let it take you down permanently. One of the concepts that I went with was that life after child loss is, I wasn't going to let my loss define me, but it would refine me. So that has been, the thing, and I've been intentional with what I've done.
Powerful. So we have your information at the bottom of the screen for anyone who's interested in reaching out to you. Is there anything that you want people to know about? You are a coach, so you'll absolutely be, a resource for someone who's looking for support. Is there anything else about the work you're doing that you want us to know about?
Yes, I would be so honored to share this with you. So I have a program, it's Hope and Healing After Loss. And, when I mentioned the book was original healing, but then when I stepped back and really took a big look at what was helped me to be able to navigate and walk through this, was looking at 4 areas of health. And it's my physical health, the mental health, emotional, and spiritual health. And being able hold those things together and offer them to others and say, okay, you know what? you have these things, but when it comes to your physical health, we talk about taking care of your body, with self-care. We talk about nutrition. We talk about fear. What is your fear in moving forward, and what type of fears, and help you to get through those. And then we look at acceptance. What would acceptance mean to you to be able to get through that? Then I'm going to bring this back around with the physical. We have the physical, the mental, emotional, and spiritual health, in which I help with all those, help you to think differently about things, explore your spirituality. To me, it's my faith with God, but it doesn't have to be with you. I think the important thing is that when it comes to that, is like having something higher and bigger than us that can explain the unexplainable. And so working through all those is really taking you from grief to healing, is by following this simple process, which I know was 100% responsible for what I did and being where I am now. If I didn't have those things in my back pocket, I wouldn't be here. And so that's why I'm so excited to share them and teach other people. That's my commitment. And I know that's what other grieving moms want. They want to be able to move from their grief to healing.
Amazing work you're doing, Peggy. It is such an honor and privilege to know you. I look forward to supporting what you're up to. I love the work that you're doing. I think it's so needed. And I thank you so much for spending some time with me today and sharing what you're out to accomplish and your very personal story with us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Have a good rest of the day.